this story from the Washington Post, but we also have another story from the New York Times. The Washington Post says Middle East braces for Hezbollah response to Lebanon pager and radio attacks. The interesting thing here, that the sentiment we're seeing from the New York Times and other news outlets is that we are both simultaneously facing World War III and Civil War. I know. I'm Tim Pool, and I said the word Civil War, but I got to give it to the New York Times because they're the ones who actually reported this. Don't look at me. Leave me out of your memes. Actually, you can meme me. It's okay. I don't know. No forced memes, though. Only if it makes sense. There's that meme where the guy has he's holding his hand. He's looking at the butterfly and it says, is this insert thing? And it's like Tim Pool, is this Civil War? And it's a butterfly. But the New York Times is saying that the international community is concerned. I talked about this a little bit yesterday, that with the election coming up, there is a real fear towards the U.S. turning into a civil war. At the same time, with the explosions that have rocked Lebanon and a fear of retaliation from Hezbollah, excuse me, as well as what we're currently seeing in Russia and Ukraine, the question asked by communists over at thecommunist.red, are we facing World War III? Shout out to I don't really want to shout him out, but I absolutely wanted to use communist.red to point out the fears of World War III and Civil War are upon us. The big question, of course, has to do with Israel's radio and pager attacks, one of the most sophisticated and precision-based strikes on a country. Fact. You can disagree with it. You can say it's terrifying. You can say it's terrible. Call it whatever you want. That's your opinion. You're entitled to it. But as a fact, this was the most sophisticated precision and probably the most precise strike ever carried out against a military target. Will this escalate us into a major international conflict? And should the U.S. election drive us to civil war? Holy crap. What can we expect in the coming year? Well, you know what? As Alex Jones always used to say, buy your gold, people, because the end, or, whatever. I don't know, because they're coming for your income tax. I mean, you buy gold, you still got to pay taxes. I'm just saying. The Washington Post reports Lebanon is reeling from 2 consecutive days of deadly explosions of electronic devices as countries across the Middle East wait anxiously for Hezbollah to announce its response. In a widely anticipated speech Thursday, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Hezbollah militant group, is expected to outline how the group intends to retaliate for the attacks, which killed at least 32 and injured more than 3,000 on Tuesday and Wednesday, when pagers, and then the next day, walkie-talkies and other devices exploded simultaneously across Lebanon. Israeli authorities, who rarely discuss operations in other countries, declined to comment on whether Israel was responsible. But the sophisticated and complex operation bore the hallmarks of Israel's intelligence agency Mossad, which has a history of carrying out targeted assassinations abroad. U.S. officials have acknowledged Israel was behind the attack. 2 U.S. officials who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive subject said the Israelis did not inform the U.S. about the specifics before the attack took place, but told Washington afterward through intelligence channels. With anxiety swirling over whether there will be more attacks involving wireless devices, Beirut's international airport has banned passengers from carrying pagers and walkie-talkies onto any aircraft. Lebanon State News Agency reported the Lebanese army said Thursday that it was still detonating suspicious communication devices across the country. The explosions, which began on Tuesday afternoon when thousands of pagers used by Hezbollah members beeped simultaneously before erupting, sent people streaming into hospitals across Lebanon, many having lost eyes or hands or suffering serious abdominal injuries. 2 children were among those killed Tuesday, Lebanese Health Minister Firas Abiad said Wednesday. Taiwanese pager manufacturer Gold Apollo, whose logo was seen on some of the destroyed pagers, said it did not make the devices that exploded in Lebanon. The company said in a statement that the pagers in question were entirely handled by a Hungarian company called BAC Consulting, KFT. BAC did not respond to requests for comment. Hungarian government spokesman Zoltán Kovacs said the reference devices have never been in Hungary. On Wednesday afternoon, a new round of detonations involving 2-way radios and fingerprint analysis devices, according to Lebanon Civil Defense, killed at least 20 people and damaged or set fire to homes, shops, and vehicles in northern Lebanon. The eastern Bekaa province and Beirut southern suburbs, at least one of the explosions occurred at a funeral in those suburbs held by Hezbollah for people who were killed in Tuesday's blasts. Let me tell you, my friends, pagers exploded, killing people. At a funeral for one of these individuals, a radio explodes. They're saying other devices are wired too. They have no idea what's been wired to blow. The fears of World War III, I think it's real. Jerusalem Post is reporting that Israel thwarted an Iranian plot to assassinate Benjamin Netanyahu. Yoav Gallant, Ronan Bar. The Shin Bet unveiled an Iranian assassination plot targeting Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and Shin Bet Director Ronan Bar. I believe they have the man in custody. They say they plotted to assassinate them. Its efforts were particularly intense following the assassination of Hamas political chief Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran on July 31st. The plot was to use an Israeli businessman named as Moti Maman, 73 years old from Ashkelon, who spent extensive time living in Turkey and had financial dealings with both Turkish and Iranian persons to develop assassination plans in Israel. Now, a lot of people don't like Israel. That's fine. A lot of people don't like Netanyahu. I get it. But what do you think happens with Donald Trump facing 2 assassination plots, Netanyahu now facing an assassination plot, exploding devices all across the Middle East, as well as escalation in Ukraine? What is a third world war going to look like? Look, there are a bunch of articles about it. There's a bunch of articles just when you Google search it. These are the things. I don't know what Divided We Fall is, but it's a website that pops up on Google search, so they're certainly in the algorithm. America is at a crossroads, another civil war possible. I'm sorry, these are Civil War articles. The Wall Street Journal says U.S. shrugs as World War III approaches. A devastating report on global threats and America weakness is met with indifference. The Economic Times says, are we in for a World War III? Here's what you should know. And we have the communists, as I mentioned. I love this source because it's silly. Are we facing World War III? From Washington to London, Kiev to Tel Aviv, the war drums are banging ever louder. As the Western imperialists and their henchmen look to prolong and escalate the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, we say down with all the warmongers. You know, I got to hand it to the communists. I at least agree with them on that. And it's interesting. They'll say it's far right, it's pro-Russia or whatever. If you simply question U.S. involvement in these conflicts, you have to be hoorah, war all the way. If you do not jump on the gravity bomb and ride all the way down, like in Dr. Strangelove, you're a Russian plant, you're a far left, you're a far right, whatever. But here we go, baby. It ain't just World War III, it's Civil War. The New York Times has written about it quite a bit. Why? I got a question for you guys. Why does the New York Times keep writing that civil war is coming? Isn't that crazy? Little out there, eh, New York Times? Now, in this article I brought up the other day, which is literally just from 2 days ago, they say that the second attempt on the former president's life have accentuated international concerns, raising fears of violent turmoil spiraling towards civil war. Keir Starmer, the British prime minister, is very worried and deeply troubled by what the FBI said was an attempt to kill Trump at his Florida golf course, fewer than 50 days before the election. They say yet violence has played a core part in this stormy, lurching American political campaign, and not only in the 2 apparent assassination attempts. There is now widespread concern across the globe that the November election will not end well, and that American democracy, once a beacon to the world, has frayed to the breaking point. In Mexico, where elections this year were the most violent in the country's recent history, with 41 candidates and aspirants for public office assassinated. Jeez. Wow. Obrador, the president, said, even though what has happened is still unclear, we regret the violence against Trump. At a time of wars in Europe and the Middle East and widespread global insecurity as China and Russia assert the superiority of their autocratic models, American precariousness weighs heavily. Corentin Sellin, a French history professor, said the brutalization of American politics has left France wondering whether the presidential campaign will finish peacefully. France was stunned, he said, by the January 6, 2021 storming of the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters. And there is this notion that the story that started with the insurrection has not yet ended. The threat of violence at times, even the need for it, has been a core part of Trump's message. Lies. Trump has never called for violence. That is a lie. And to that, I will stress, nor has Kamala Harris nor Joe Biden. They have all condemned it. That being said, we can certainly recognize that when Democrats come out and say things like Donald Trump is an existential threat, we should get in their faces. They are standing on the line. I don't think it's fair to say they've crossed it. But when you have 2 assassination attempts and then they come out and say, yeah, well, he's still an existential threat, now they're crossing it. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, the Republicans keep saying, stop. Look at this. Because Trump says fight, they blame him for violence. This is standard political rhetoric. Standard political rhetoric. Fighting just means pushing back and trying to win. It doesn't mean being physical. The New York Times, full of lies. But they wrote this, an opinion piece. The real path to civil war. This week, Donald Trump was put on trial by a liberal prosecutor on what seems like the most nakedly political on multiple charges that he's facing. To protest this outrage against their glorious leader, the MAGA faithful gathered outside New York courthouse in the thousands, ready to storm into the halls of justice. Oh, please. This article, of course, is from April 17th. The fairly pitiful scene, blah, blah, blah. Some people who like civil war find the political lacuna admirable, since it cuts the movie, and they're talking about the film. Some people who dislike the movie, I'm one of them, think that the under-explanation is a total cop-out, making civil strife seem like a natural disaster or a zombie apocalypse. I actually agree. The film was good because it mocked journalists. It showed the depravity of journalists. I agree with that. But the film didn't explain any of how civil war comes to be or ultimately what it means. A lot of people think that these days, they say, here's a short list of the reasons. They say, if you think we're obviously teetering on the brink of a disaster, it's easier to accept a work of art that imagines us tipped over. A lot of people think that these days, so here's a short list of the reasons they're wrong. America's ideological divisions don't follow the kind of geographical or regional lines that lend themselves to a secessionist movements or armed conflict. I'm going to pause there. Answer for this guy's ignorance. As I often mention, people think civil war means the North and the South fighting. Take a look at the Spanish Civil War. The uprising was in various pockets across the country. Certain areas were Republican, certain areas were communist or whatever. It's very different. You don't need geographical lines for a civil war. That's insane. That's stupid. He says America's political coalitions have become less polarized by race and ethnicity of late, not more. What does that mean? Less polarized by race? Is he implying that a civil war will require racial division? America is getting older and richer with every passing year, both of which strongly disincentivize transforming political differences into military ones. People right now feel like they're in a recession, despite what the government is saying. And such disincentives are especially strong for the elites who would need to divide into opposing camps. You do not need that. You need only cultural divides. Above all, a civil war needs people eager for the fight. A lot of people for continent-wide war, or the kind depicted in the movie, but a critical mass even for a lower grade form of civil strife, like Northern Ireland's Troubles. And relative to the past eras of crisis in our history, from the 1860s to 1960s, Americans today just do not display any great enthusiasm for politically motivated violence. Instead, the gap between the Sturm and Drang online and the handful of Trump supporters at the courthouse this week is representative of one part of our condition, an enthusiasm for online conflict, virtual combat, rage tweets, and hate clicks as substitutes for brawling and bombing in the real world. I'd like to now say, since 2018, we've seen an escalation of street violence, culminating in two major political moments. The Summer of Love riots, which saw around 30 deaths, the worst riots in 50 years, the storming of the White House, the firebombing of the White House, the president rushed into an emergency bunker as hundreds, or over 100, I should say, law enforcement were injured. Then the riots at the Capitol on January 6th. Now, this man writes this article amid all of this and still just says nothing is happening anywhere. Nobody's fighting in the streets. Did you forget? You people scream about January 6th every 5 minutes. But now we're looking at 2 assassination attempts. Only a couple months after he wrote this, Trump was shot in the side of the head, narrowly dying. Or I should say narrowly surviving. Sorry. Almost being killed. So what is this? He says, what about a second Trump administration as the spark? Given that the last Trump administration ended. What about January 6th? What about, to be more bipartisan, the waves of protest and violence in the summer of 2020? He gets to it, you see. The city's on fire, the tear gas outside. Didn't Americans show an appetite for internecine conflict then? The answer is they did, albeit up to a well short of the 1860s point. But the breakdown happened only in a pandemic year under extremely unusual conditions and pressures most people had never experienced before. A once-in-a-century global plague and an unprecedented shutdown of society converging with a fraud election did indeed break through the torpor I'm describing. But once circumstances normalized, the appeal of protest dissipated. There was no follow-up to January 6th on the right. No wave of insurrectionary violence carried out by true believers in President Biden's illegitimacy. No rush to join the Proud Boys by ordinary right-wingers. Likewise, on the left, The racial reckoning was subsumed back into bureaucratic politics. The Chaz commune in Seattle was dismantled rather than imitated. Antifa receded back into the shadows. This guy is just wrong. He's not completely wrong. I'll give him some. But it's important to point out that the Minneapolis Autonomous Zone maintained the George Floyd Zone. He goes on to say, maybe a pandemic substantially worse than COVID, which prompts states to close their borders and splits the country much more completely and viciously, say New York and Florida's pandemic policies. Maybe some radical technological development on the frontiers of AI, maybe a climate crisis. What I'm offering here are basically notes on the Civil War screenplay, suggesting for how it could have made its vision of war coming home seem more realistic. But they all involve something more than just an extension of current trends, a slightly heightened version of contemporary politics. Could it happen here? Maybe. But something stranger than just Trump v. Biden round 2 would have to happen first. Okay, now let's assess that, because I'll give respect to his statements and his opinions. Someone tried to kill Donald Trump on July 13th, and Trump narrowly survived. Someone just tried to kill him again. Here's a real path to civil war. Someone shoots Donald Trump. Do we really think that it ends here? When you see these cases, these people are being emboldened by what they're seeing. It's terrifying. Secret Service needs to double their protection on all of our political leaders. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Trump, Vance, and maybe even others. If they can do it, they can't be spread too thin. But here's a real path to civil war. All the things you described culminating in Donald Trump losing his life. There's so many scenarios that could result in abject chaos. I believe it was 1876. I always confuse the year, where, fearing another civil war was about to break out, instead of having the electorate decide the presidency, a committee of Democrats and Republicans got together and negotiated who the president would be. They wanted to avoid a civil war. Is it possible that in this election, in 47 days, they tell us there will be no clear victor? They're going to say, you're going to have to wait a couple weeks before we know who actually won. Could it be that facing such extreme turmoil and strife, that the deep state has a negotiation with Trump, the MAGA camp, and says, we need to avoid a civil war in this country? I don't know. You see, when the American Civil War happened, we weren't entangled in foreign conflict in various countries. So what I'm looking at that terrifies me is U.S. military bases all over the world, international conflict where there's assassinations, regional conflict is growing in the Middle East. Ukraine invades Russia and is now requesting the use of long-range Western U.S. and NATO weapons. You add that to the conflict we are facing on the streets of this country and the assassination attempts on Donald Trump, and it all gives you a terrifying image of what could happen. I don't have any answers for you. I really don't. I hope this guy's right. I hope people are just bloviating and nothing happens. But what do you think happens if Trump loses? I don't think the unions and all of these other groups that are supporting Trump are just going to sit by and be like, well, that's it. I guess America's over. I don't think the American people will stand to tolerate cartels and migrants and gangs taking over apartment buildings or the grilling of cats. We saw the video. There's a video of people from the Congo grilling cats, and the media just says it's not true. I don't see the media apparatus surviving and maintaining their stranglehold on the narrative. I see a continued bifurcation with no off-ramp. How do the American people reconcile the extreme polarization? That is, one faction advocating for the sterilization of children and child sex changes, and the other trying to ban it. I mean, these are extreme things. Well, there's a simple reality. And that reality is that liberals don't have kids. They stop having kids, and then what ends up happening is conservatives have more kids, and things start to calm down as conservatives take more and more power. Liberals just slowly cease to exist. Their ideas go with them. The NPC default libs just adhere to the modern cultural standard and say, I was always conservative. Perhaps. Or perhaps an international incident leads to a domestic incident, and then we get World War III and the Civil War at the exact same time. I'm going to leave it there. Smash that like button, my friend. Subscribe to this channel. Share the show with all your friends if you really do like the show. Next segment will be coming up at 6 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.